Thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar. My name is Emma Mamo and I am Head of Workplace Wellbeing at Mind, the mental health charity. Mind provides advice and support to empower anyone experiencing a mental health problem. We also campaign to improve services, raise awareness and promote understanding of mental health. At Mind, we've just launched a major new project called the Blue Light Programme, which is dedicated to helping support the mental health of emergency services personnel across England. So staff and volunteers working within the police service, the fire and rescue service and the ambulance service, as well as the search and rescue services. The programme is focusing on raising awareness and tackling stigma within the services, and then also providing training for line managers and team leaders so they're better able to support the mental health of their staff. And then also building resilience among personnel so they're better able to manage their mental health while working in these challenges roles. And then we're also providing information and support to anyone who needs it. This webinar and others in the series have been made specifically for emergency service personnel. Joining us to share their experiences and knowledge of supporting colleagues working within the ambulance service are Reverend Kevin Charles, who's chaplain and staff support lead from East Midlands Ambulance Service, and then Joe Bradshaw, also from East Midlands Ambulance Service, who works as Organisational Development Manager. So in this webinar, we will talk about mental health and mental health at work. What are the key factors that can affect someone's mental health at work, especially for those working within the ambulance service? And then how can an employer kind of support their staff to have good mental health at work? And then also, how do you support someone if they are experiencing a problem? And of course, we're going to hear the experiences from Kev and Joe about what they've done within their organisation. So what do we mean when we talk about mental health? Well, we all have mental health the same as we have physical health. It exists on a spectrum, shifting along from good to poor. And it can be affected by many things in life, both in and out of work. And it's just as important for our well-being as physical health. And maintaining both is an important part of staying fit and healthy. And they both directly impact on our ability to achieve and maintain quality of life. So in terms of prevalence, Mind knows that 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem in any given year. So this is of great importance and relevance to all of us, not only in understanding our own mental health, but that of others we will undoubtedly come into contact with through our jobs, either colleagues or the general public. So thinking about the 220,000 emergency services personnel working across England, it's likely that 1/4 of these people will experience mental ill health every year. However, we also appreciate that that this can be compounded by the challenging nature of the profession. And actually, as part of the Blue Light Programme, we surveyed 3,500 Blue Light personnel, and 87% of them said they had experienced stress, low mood or poor mental health whilst working within the emergency services. So this does suggest that working in the ambulance service and other emergency services means that you can be particularly vulnerable to having your well-being affected by your role. And we also found that through our research that 53% of personnel were not aware of any mental health support provided by their employer. But of those that were aware and had accessed to it, 79% within the ambulance service who responded to our survey gave a negative rating of the support available. So we'll be talking about that later in terms of what East Midlands Ambulance Service are doing, which is really responding to the needs of their staff. So when we think about the key factors that can affect someone's mental health in the workplace, what we found from people responding to the survey is that they're feeling a lot of pressure as a result of a number of issues that are happening at the moment. So when we asked people to identify the aspects of their role that were having the biggest impact on their mental health, personnel mentioned an increased workload, having quite a physically demanding work, challenging working conditions, so being exposed to trauma and quite distressing situations. And then thinking about organisational change and then how that's managed, so people not really being made aware or involved in changes that are happening with how the ambulance service is being run and so on. And then lack of control over the work you do and potentially unreasonable, unmanageable expectations. And then thinking about the more social aspects of the role, so having poor working relationships with colleagues, potentially experiencing bullying, and then conflicting demands in and out of work, so trying to balance, get that right work-life balance. And then also talking about changes to shift patterns and prolonged shifts, And then also ambulance personnel highlighted having financial worries that we all have to deal with, but also then having negative media coverage of the kind of service that the ambulance service is providing at the moment, and delays and so on. So having to kind of deal with that quite challenging conditions and so on. So as you can imagine, all of these issues can have a substantial impact on someone's well-being. So in terms of how any employer can best support the mental health of their staff, being able to communicate effectively with colleagues and talk about mental health is a highly valuable skill and plays a huge part in creating mentally healthy working practices and cultures. But it does require an organisational approach that needs to be reflected in all management procedures, practices and policies. So at Mind, what we recommend to any employer who wants to get this right in terms of supporting the mental health of their staff, we would say that you have to introduce an approach that, one, promotes well-being for all of your staff, because as we said, we all have mental health. And then two, you have to be alert to and identifying the kind of work-related causes of poor mental health, so you can kind of address them, try and minimise and so on. And then you have to be able to support staff wherever they are on the spectrum. So thinking about this three-pronged approach, it needs to be kind of rolled out across the organisation and at all levels of responsibility. So in terms of how to get this right, what I will say for it to be successful, you do need to have senior leadership kind of bought into this agenda. So then I'm going to talk about each kind of approach in turn, but around promoting well-being, in order to foster a positive and healthy working culture, there are several steps that can be taken, such as ensuring mental health is on the agenda. So talking about well-being regularly, getting people to think through, what they can do to support their mental health at work. And then, as I said, strong leadership. So for kind of senior leaders to be positive and generate an open and accepting culture that values the well-being of staff and so on. And then sending clear message, so ensuring, taking sufficient breaks during the day is supported, and working sensible working hours and so on. And then also being able to support flexible working where possible. It'd be interesting to hear Joe and Kevin's views around how flexible you can be while working within the ambulance service. We know that people have, outside caring responsibilities for children, older family members. So how much flexibility is there to help people manage those different challenges? And then in terms of what we were talking about, what I was mentioning earlier around organisational change and how you can best involve staff in making decisions about how the service is run, and promoting open dialogue can help people kind of manage change. So linked to that is ensuring good, clear kind of internal communication and so on. And then I think also being able to create space for personnel to raise issues, either home issues or work issues, where they might be experiencing problems. I mean, obviously any home issues, it's not your job to try and solve them, but it's good for managers and team leaders to have an understanding of what's going on in people's lives and if that might be impacting on their ability to do their job. And then I think also, investing in personnel, like prioritising learning and development and career development, and it'd be good to, again, hear your views about what's available to people. And we also know that promoting physical activities can really boost people's mental health, as well as supporting them to have good physical health. And then looking at social activities where you can kind of build those positive working relations with colleagues, which then also means you've got a support network to draw on if you are experiencing a problem. And another thing that we promote in terms of promoting wellbeing is trying to encourage peer support and buddying systems within a workplace. So obviously your line manager is quite key, or your team leader is quite key for raising issues, but sometimes there might be problems that you might be experiencing with them. So I think having other alternative sources of support where you could go and talk about issues can be quite good, and also having debriefs and so on after challenging instances. So then in terms of tackling the causes of mental health problems, this again is very key in terms of having an organisational approach that's reflected in your various policies and practices that support personnel wellbeing, backed up by training for line managers so they can effectively implement these policies, especially around understanding mental health and its interaction with work, and then how best to kind of explore supporting staff. So I think first and foremost it's about routinely taking stock of your personnel's mental wellbeing so you can get a true sense of what's going on across the organisation. So regularly checking in with personnel whether that's formally at an organisational level, like doing staff surveys, or if just at a team level, informally, where you're just checking in with people. But it'll help you understand the factors that are affecting personnel well-being, and then you can identify what you're doing well to support people and how you can build on that. But then also understanding what impact current ways of working might be impacting on people and how you might need to address them, which can then help with kind of planning how to improve or address any issues. So that would be quite useful. And then in terms of top tips for line managers and team leaders around tackling the causes of work-related mental health problems, I think first and foremost it's about leading by example, and you modelling quite positive behaviours around supporting your own mental health, so you send the right signal. I definitely realise if I'm working late any night, I'll say to my team I'm working late because I'm actually planning to go early on Friday, so I'm not kind of encouraging poor practices amongst the staff or feeling like there's a kind of culture they have to kind of adhere to. So it'd be good to hear your views around that in a moment. And then, I think it's just building your confidence around mental health. It can feel quite scary to try and broach the conversation with a staff member, so it's just making sure you feel comfortable to have those conversations and then normalising it. So, as I said, checking in regularly in order to take a kind of temperature check with your team members. So having regular debriefs or supervisions where you can find out what's going on for them and address any issues. And then I think it's just about being available for your staff and volunteers and treating people as individuals in order to best support them. And then in terms of how do you actually support someone who might be experiencing a mental health problem, there is that idea about people are on a spectrum. It might be someone dealing with some workplace stress, or it might be dealing with some mental distress related to a bereavement or a breakdown of a relationship or so on. And then also it might be the fact that someone is living with a diagnosed mental health condition, and how do you then manage that condition while in work. So I think it's just having conversations with staff members about what does it look like for them, and then putting in any support measures or adjustments to help them kind of get through that period of poor mental health and so on. In terms of what this can look like, it can be quite hard to try and think through for mental health what could adjustment look like, but they generally fall into three broad categories. So one is around making changes to how people perform their role, and then there might be changes to the role itself, or then provision of extra support either by their manager or team leader or by colleagues. So in terms of how you could kind of introduce some adjustments or workplace support measures, some examples include changes to their shift start and finish times, so that would be beneficial. Changes to break times. I know of someone who kind of takes their 1 hour lunches in different blocks during the day to help them manage their mental health. Then having maybe the provision of quiet rooms where people can go if they are feeling stressed or distressed, and they can take time out. And then also relaxing absence rules for those who might be having disability-related absence. And then agreeing to give an employee leave at short notice or time off for a mental health appointment, such as therapy and counselling if they need it. And then, as I was saying, there might be some changes you could introduce to how they do their job, either permanently or in the short term, such as reallocation of some tasks or changes to people's duties, or redeployment to a more suitable role, or providing training and support to apply for vacancies or opportunities in other parts of the service. And then, as I was saying, around line managers also providing extra support through perhaps increased supervision or debrief, so people can kind of process how they've been doing in the job and reflect on any things that they may have struggled with, and then look at what you could put in place to support them. Could that be extra training, coaching or mentoring? And then also, if people are struggling with their mental health or their self-esteem, providing positive and constructive feedback to help them kind of manage that negative thinking they might be experiencing. Then, as I said previously, debriefing sessions after difficult incidents, so people can kind of process the action they decided to take and reflect on any learning from that. And then again, building in opportunities to discuss their achievements or recent successes, again to kind of counter that low mood they might be experiencing. And we were talking about peer support earlier, and I think some colleagues may also find it beneficial to take part in a buddy system or support groups, or having a safe space in the workplace where they can have some time out either to speak with their buddy or do whatever they need to help them manage their mental health. And I think it's important, if you do put in place any support measures or adjustments, agreeing to regularly review how well they're working and tweak them if necessary. But I think ultimately it's about both providing and taking the time and space to address any mental health concerns or worries early on. Kind of goes a long way to ensuring a more positive outcome if someone is struggling with their mental health. And I'm just going to talk briefly about, well, how do I know if someone might need support? And I would say that you should know the people in your team better than anyone else, so you can kind of see changes in them. But sometimes, someone experiencing a mental health problem, there may be no outward signs. So again, it's about trying to promote a culture where people feel comfortable to seek support early. But in terms of potential signs of a mental health problem or signs that someone might be struggling, this can include changes in their behaviour. Are they being more withdrawn than normal? Are they quite a chatty person? Have there been any changes in their appearance? Has there been any loss of motivation, or are they struggling to concentrate or make decisions? I know I struggle when I'm experiencing stress with making decisions and so on. So you can kind of see when someone might be experiencing poor mental health. Is there an increase in drinking or smoking, or if they said they've started experiencing any problems with their sleep? And also if you just become aware of any life events or changes in their circumstances, for example, like a breakdown in their relationship, that could then say, actually, this might be a point in time when they might be struggling. So if you do feel like you have kind of noticed these signs and you feel like it's appropriate to try and broach the conversation, I think trying to find the time and space to have that conversation is really key. You'll know how best to kind of approach someone. Is it saying to them, do you want to go for a coffee? And just saying, I've noticed some changes. Is there anything you want to share with me? And obviously, if you've kind of been talking about mental health and people's well-being regularly, it won't be, it'll feel more normal to kind of broach that kind of conversation. And then once you've, if they do open up to you, you can then start exploring what's going on for them and what support you can kind of put in place for them. And then suggesting any small steps that they can take to start addressing the issues. And then, as I said, considering any adjustments to their role or the offer of extra support. And I think key things to remember would be, be positive in your approach, focus what they can do and how you can support them, rather than the things that they can't do. And I think try as much as possible to involve them in finding solutions as much as possible. People, if they're experiencing a mental health problem, can feel a loss of control, so just giving people as many options to explore might be helpful. And also people just tend to be in the best place to kind of talk about what might help them. And then in terms of, there's a tool, I wouldn't mind getting people's views on this. So there's a tool that people can develop with their health professional. It's called a Wellness Recovery Action Plan. So if someone's been diagnosed with a mental health problem, they then come up with a plan with their health professional about what steps they need to take to maintain good mental health, and then what are the early warning signs they might be struggling, and then what are the kind of triggers that might cause them to have poor mental health. And then it outlines what they need to do in response, and then what their health professional needs to do in response. Now, at Mind, we've adapted this tool and just called it a Wellness Action Plan, and people can use it in a workplace context where they'd develop it with their manager or team leader, and it just helps them identify, what does mental health at work look like for me? What do I need to do to have good mental health? And then what could be a trigger for poor mental health for me, and the signs that I might be struggling. So it kind of gives the line manager or the team leader permission to kind of broach the subject if they see those signs. And then you also have identified some support that might be helpful for the line manager to do and for the person to do. Do you think that could be something that could be easily rolled out in an ambulance service, or?
I think it's something that would be interesting to pursue.
Yep.
And see how that could be put into the workplace. I don't know what you think, Jo.
No, definitely. It'll be interesting to see what our occupational health team already use. But certainly something in terms of an action plan that enables somebody to understand themselves better, know what their triggers are, and communicate that to their colleagues, their managers, is absolutely something that you'd promote, because it helps everybody understand that individual's needs and requirements.
No, because I heard of a guy who was working within the ambulance service, and he'd recently got divorced, and he went to a call out where it was an older gentleman who had lived alone and had died and was kind of not discovered for a couple of weeks, and it really affected him because he thought, is that my future? I've just split up with my wife and so on. And he said he found that more triggering than any other incident he'd been to recently. And I just thought it was interesting to then think about, yeah, there are different things that might affect people in different ways. So having a proactive tool like that might help identify, well, these incidents I might find more triggering because of personal experiences I've had. I don't know, do people talk in those terms within the ambulance service?
It's certainly new speak that we use now within our organisation, through introducing the trauma risk management processes that we're using, which talks about triggers, and we respond to difficult incidences that people potentially find quite traumatic. But you're right in saying that any incident could trigger
for an individual
for lots of different reasons, and so it's sometimes hard to know what will trigger individuals until it actually happens. But certainly what we've enabled our service to do is have the trauma risk management to respond to incidences that are
quite
deemed
major.
as traumatic, but also our staff can access that same system on an if they're feeling very, very stressed or worried about their own mental health, they can actually access the TRIM support.
That's good.
Because often it could be accumulative incidences that have built up their trauma.
The kind of daily grind, No, I just wanted to find out, if you thought that'd be useful. So as I said, it kind of outlines, the positive behaviours, but then also, what to do if someone does start struggling. And then again, you put it in place and then you agree a time to review it, because we can all change in our roles and also in our life experiences. So it's just about trying to be more proactive and identify it before there's a problem. That'd be quite useful. And I will say that, Mind's produced a host of resources that kind of explain these processes and approaches in greater detail. So I've kind of started there, but it'd be really good to then kind of expand a bit more about what you're both doing at East Midlands Ambulance Service. So we're now going to hear from Reverend Kevin about his experience of working in the ambulance service. And as I mentioned before, he's chaplain and staff support lead from East Midlands Ambulance Service. I'll just hand that over to you.
Right, thank you very much, Emma, for that. It's interesting from my own point of view to hear some of the things you're doing in Mind. We seem to be on the right tracks with what we're doing at the ambulance service. First, in case people thinking, well, why have we got a reverend at the ambulance service? It's a new role, and as far as we're aware, it's with the only service in the country as its full-time chaplain. And the way we've got around that is because of our understanding and need for giving support for our staff. So along as being the chaplain, I'm also the staff support lead.
Okay.
The way I can answer a lot of understanding of what our crews are going through and our staff in general is that I've been with the service now for 35 years. And yes, I've been operational. I still am operational. I still can be called on to respond to incidents if needs be, although I don't wear the dog collar when I'm doing that. There's been a lot of change in the ambulance service since the days when I first started, and that almost seems to be year upon year upon year of increases in work, and we don't see a massive increase in our resources. We have seen some, but not to try and manage the workloads we have. Long gone are the days when crews used to go do perhaps 2 or 3 jobs and they get sent back to base. They used to have time to support one another. And basically what's happening is now they're doing job after job after job. The crews are experiencing very long working days, and I just want to talk about crews in this instance because it does impact on everything what we have put in place for our staff. They're doing 12-hour rotated shifts as a general, and it's not uncommon for those crews to get back to their base till their 10th hour of shift before they have a meal break.
Wow.
So these people, they aren't robots, they're not machines. They need feeding, they need support, they need looking after. But on top of that, there can also be the time that it might be taking them, they get a job towards the 11th hour of the shift, what takes them over the finishing time, so they end up doing something like a 13, 14-hour shift. And like I say, long gone are the days where we could have time to be on station talking to one another. without doubt, the operational workload, it bears no resemblance to what it was when I first started. Then you'd be sent back to base, like I said before. You could have time to spend time to be able to care for one another. But the increase in pressure and leaving our staff feeling stressed. They're feeling stressed because of the increase in work. They feel stressed because, for whatever reason, they feel nobody bothers about them. And there's a feeling of not being valued, and they're tired. And I'm not saying that from the ambulance point of view. It's right across the board in a lot of the blue light services. Increase in demand, the resources not matching it because of cutbacks or whatever. And what we are experiencing is that some of these people who feel stress, they don't come out and say anything. They feel it's not I don't want to be sexist here, but it's not a macho thing to do. And I think we'd agree men are the worst for this. We seem to have this thing, we can cope with everything. And so basically they feel that saying that they feel stressed and tired is a weak thing. And this is wrong. We need to have put things in place where they can turn to for support, and so they can address and discuss the kind of things what they're going through. So what have we done in EMAS to deal with all this? Well, there's always been staff support. But nothing to the levels what we're at now. We've introduced very recently a thing called peer-to-peer, or as we affectionately call it, P2P. The P2P has also got attached to that our pastoral care workers. We've introduced a new programme this year to us, but it's not, it'll be known by some of the other blue light services, which is TRIM, Trauma Risk Management. Yeah. And one of the big things what one of our colleagues wrote and we've implemented is a improving wellbeing handbook. Then of course there's myself with the chaplaincy support, and I deal for people whether they're religious or non-religious, so I want to stress that there. So what I'd like to do now is just explain to you a little bit what the P2P is. The peer-to-peer network is a principle around colleagues supporting one another. It's not just a case of it's manager-led, it's not manager-led. It's by the peers themselves. When we introduced this, we sent out expressions of interest. Bearing in mind they're all volunteers, they don't get paid for this, so it's people who's got a passion for dealing for the colleagues. We thought we'd be lucky if we got 40 staff. We got swamped, we've got 80. Brilliant. We've got 80 colleagues who's come along to provide support for the colleagues. So what does P2P do? Well, it's a support mechanism in the sense of they provide a listening ear.
Right.
And they're also taught not to wait for somebody to come to them, but to use their eyes, use their ears, see if somebody's struggling, hear if somebody's struggling, and not be afraid to go and put the arm around that person, so to speak, and say, are you all right? And I think research and feedback has been just having another human being asking about you can speak volumes. It can do a lot. So they've undergone training regarding this. They aren't there to give advice. I want to stress that. They're purely there as volunteers who listen and almost encourage somebody. Just say, well, are you aware of these other support mechanisms within the trust and externally?
So just some general signposting as well as listening.
As well as listening. On top of that is what we call the PCWs, the pastoral care workers. They take some of the workload off myself in the sense that they've had this special training to look at the people's inner spirituality, so that people are in tune with themselves. If you've got somebody who is stressed or is anxious or going through any kind of personal trauma in their lives, sometimes they seem to lose connection with themselves. So these people get alongside them and help that person come in tune with themselves again. And that is basically, it's a big thing to get those two people together and allow the person who is suffering in whatever way be able to open up.
Right.
But it's there, and it is working. It's helping that person gain touch with themselves again, to have that capability to manage
To
and
build
to
their
cope.
resilience.
To build the resilience, Emma. Yeah, totally. What we do stress to the volunteers, and what we do stress to all the staff within the service, is that these people aren't counsellors. I really do have to stress this to them. They're not counsellors. They are listeners and encouragers. And the build-up of understanding confidentiality is key to all this. When we talk about the pastoral care workers, it's not just a case of, it's not a religious side of it. When we talk about spirituality, if people want to bring religion in, that's fine. So I always say it's for people, non-religious and religious. Once again, to look after that person's own inner spirituality. The P2Ps and the pastoral care workers, they're not judgmental, right? And it's just allowing the person to be able to open up, somebody who they can share, to have that conversation with, someone perhaps who they can trust. And this is one of the big understanding that managers have had to understand, is that it's nothing against the managers, it's just that sometimes it's easier for someone else to talk to one of their peers.
Well, sometimes once you say something, you can't unsay it. So the formal relationship you have with your manager, it can sometimes be more comfortable to maybe speak with, as you say, a peer-to-peer or the kind of pastoral care workers.
It's to get rid of the thing that if they're going to be talking to a manager, the senior's weak. If they talk to a manager, it might lead to a disciplinary. It might lead to something else. We know that these aren't the cases, but it's
the fear that
it's
people
the
have.
fear of it. So it's helping the peers look after the peers. The new model, what we've brought out, is the trauma risk management, is new to EMAS. We've only undertaken that this year. And like I said earlier, it is used by some of the blue light services. But it helps when we've had our staff go to sometimes a traumatic incident, but it doesn't always have to be trauma. It can be somebody who's had perhaps 2 or 3 other bad jobs. And how that works is that once we are informed about this job, it comes through from our control managers into the 2 TRIM coordinators, who then disseminate those jobs out to the practitioners. The programme was originated within the Royal Marines. The military forces are well adverse with it. The problem we have is that in the military, you're told to go for a TRIM. Within themselves, it's optional.
Right.
So some staff buy into it, some staff don't. So how does it work? Basically, is like I say, once we've had the incident, 72 hours after that incident is when the TRIM practitioner meets with that member of staff or crew, and then they go through a psychological assessment. Once again, we aren't counsellors, we aren't experts in the psychological field, but we've all gone through, 16 of us have gone through this training, so we know what questions to ask, we're taught what questions to ask, what to look for changes in people. What happens in the first 72 hours, some people might ask, is quite simply that the support is provided by the team leaders, which are the frontline managers, and also the peer-to-peer colleagues. So once again, they are picked up in that 72 hours. Once they've gone through this 72-hour assessment, pending how they score, it might be a case we put a watching brief on them, or they are referred to our occupational health department. Then normally the next assessment takes place 28 days.
Okay.
There's also something there what we call the Tom Jones effect, that it's not unusual for you to have these kind of feelings.
Right.
It's not unusual for you to experience, and so long as it's in within a normal-ish range, then we're quite happy to either do the 28-day brief, or we'll push them on a watch.
Right.
Once they've gone after the 28 days, research suggests that there's little post-traumatic stress will either come through then, or it's just starting to emerge.
Right.
But when one was taught by this, the journalists say that by the 28 days, people's own coping mechanisms have kicked in. So once again, so it is watching for changes in people. You know, if people's appearance has changed, like you said in your introduction there,
Yeah.
or people's
Demeanour.
or anything like that has changed. So it becomes, it's like a detection for the early onset for mental health problems and stresses and anxieties. So it is a useful tool. I'm sure Joe will explain a little bit more how that fits in with the management side of it, but for us out there in the field, we're having some very good feedback from the people who've gone through the assessment. So it's early doors, it's positive. Our problem for ourselves at EMAS is that there's only 16 of us.
Right.
And when you look at the geographical size we cover, it's not many. So we want to seek some funding so we can put some more training on. So the third thing I'd mentioned is the supporting staff and welfare handbook. That's been designed by one of our colleagues, which explains a lot of signs and symptoms, what you may or may not experience. We now deal with this on all our induction courses, so all the new staff are aware of it, and it just highlights the level of support, what is out there. But the three I've mentioned to you are the three big initiatives, what we've taken on board. And I think the big message to come through all this, and especially in the handbook, is stating, and people realising that you're not alone in all this.
No.
Don't be seen as weak, and that,
It's just part and parcel of
part
doing
and
the
parcel.
job. Yeah.
And if you are struggling, just look out for the support and mechanisms what's out there. And it's basically it's just buying into what our chief exec, she just wants to feel there's a heart within EMAS. There's a heart what doesn't just beat for the patients, it beats for its staff. And it's having that visible sign of what we all hold dear to life: compassion, respect, spirituality and support for one another. And I think it's a wonderful foundation to build on all what we're doing regarding staff support in EMAS.
Thank you.
Okay.
No, that's great. That's really useful to kind of hear how it fits in with the kind of ethos of the service in terms of all of how we treat the people we're supporting externally, like the general public, but also how we kind of operate as a service. So now, kind of moving over to you, Joe. So your role within HR, Organisational Development Manager. So kind of talk more about the kind of organisational wide approach that you have taken in your role. I'll just hand that over to you. Thank you.
So I've been within East Midlands Ambulance Service for 12 years now. We've always had initiatives that focus on staff support and staff wellbeing, but in my experience, I don't think we've ever had as many initiatives and as great a focus on staff wellbeing and staff support as we do nowadays. And I think this is because of many reasons that have all come together. And some of those reasons are, for example, as Kev mentioned, our chief executive who wholeheartedly believes in staff welfare, staff wellbeing. There's a belief that if you get staff feeling great about coming to work, feeling great about being at work, feeling engaged, then you're going to have a flourishing organisation. So there's a real strong belief from our chief executive about believing in our staff. So we've also done some truly listening events. So what I mean by that is truly listening to our staff, not just hearing what they're saying, but truly listening to what they're saying, how they're saying, giving feedback to us, understanding what's important to our staff, understanding what's working well, what's not working well. So really trying to listen to what our staff are telling us and use that information to support the initiatives that we're putting in place around what they need for their roles.
Perfect.
And what they need for their well-being to make sure that they're engaged members of staff. So that's been really important for us, and listening to what our staff are saying and reporting back to them. So our staff are hopefully experiencing that EMAS is listening to them and we're doing something about it.
It feels like two-way communication.
Two-way, absolutely. So not just lost in the ether. So where that's also taken us, so we've had feedback from staff and through lots of different forums, but sometimes we've also recognised that perhaps we don't have the expertise in-house. So we've been linking into groups such as Mind through this project. We've also been linking into organisations such as March on Stress, who helped us introduce the trauma risk management programme, and also working with organisations such as Leicester's LGBT, which is lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender group. And they're a group who are working with 999 services for individuals from the LGBT population to really gain expertise that perhaps we don't have in-house, gain guidance, some understanding, so really we can find the best approach to put into place for our organisation, make sure it fits and make sure it's based on best practice and inclusive.
Because feeling included and part of the organisation helps with your mental health, so it's all part
Absolutely.
Of all the equality and diversity work. Yeah.
So we've come from a perspective of anything can impact on your mental health, and if it's something in your life that is impacting on you, for example, if you're grappling with your sexuality, or you're finding it difficult to deal with a disability that maybe you've just acquired, then anything can really impact on your mental health. So it's about recognising what support can we put into place that helps larger populations of our staff members. So that's where we're kind of coming from with the support groups. What we've also tried to do, so I mentioned about our getting some external support, but we've also harnessed our internal support. So for example, Kevin, being our chaplain, he's obviously got a wealth of information around staff support and understanding staff and understanding spirituality. So we've used that, we've harnessed it and made sure that we can use that to the best advantage of our staff and obviously other people within our organisation. So we've used ambulance personnel, so crew members, frontline, call takers, people in support services to all help contribute to what support networks need to be implemented within the organisation. So it's not a management approach, it's an encompassing approach. It's using everybody as much as we possibly can.
Sounds good.
So I mentioned that we recognise that anything can impact on people's mental health. So we have all of the standard support. For example, we have PAM Assist, which is our 24/7 phone line that any member of staff can access at any time. It also has internet support and online counselling support. So we operate a 24-hour service, so we need to be able to provide 24-hour support across the board. We also have our own occupational health service. We have wellbeing policies that we make sure that they're aligned to people's issues, things that are going to crop up in people's lives. We are currently reviewing all of our sickness absence policies and procedures to make sure that they are more fitting with life events. So often, from an organisational point of view, we may have a policy, but actually sometimes it's a little bit black and white.
Right.
So when somebody's issue really is impacting on their lives and perhaps the policy says do X, Y and Z, how can we flex that a bit to actually make sure that life is a bit more manageable, making those adjustments that you mentioned earlier, but obviously still within a policy that makes sure everybody is treated fairly and equally, so making sure we do that. And in addition, we also have the trade union support and managerial support, but we felt that wasn't providing enough support within the organisation, so we've gone hopefully one step beyond, and we've introduced, as Kevin mentioned earlier, staff support network, so the peer-to-peer, which is, as Kevin mentioned, staff supporting staff. We strongly believe that somebody who does your job, does the same job as you or a similar job to you, is perhaps is in a better place to help support you and comment on that. It's not unusual.
Yeah.
You know, it's okay to feel like this. We have our chaplain, as I mentioned. We have specialised support groups that we're investing in now. So we've started the LGBT support group. We're also investing in creating a group for disability, so individuals who have disabilities, whether that's a visible disability or whether it's a hidden disability. And again, recognising that disability can seriously affect your mental health, your self-image, your self-confidence. So recognising that people may need a bit more support around those disability issues. And we're also just about to launch another support group which is around BME, so Black and ethnic minority groups. Because again, individuals from those populations may be experiencing bullying, harassment, issues within workplace, not being able to, because of the long shift patterns, for example, not being able to pray at certain times that they need to, for example. So trying to deal with looking at issues where we can support those individuals again, because if their needs aren't being met, then that can impact on somebody's mental health.
And how they can do their job.
And impact on their job. And as Kevin mentioned again, we've invested heavily in the trauma risk management processes into the organisation. We are currently looking at our absence policy, as I mentioned, and we also have our own internal mediation service, which deals with anybody who's struggling with conflict. So if two crewmates, for example, are having difficulty with each other and there's some conflict there, then we can bring in our informal mediation service before any policies and processes kick in, and through a trained mediator, hopefully enable that conflict to disperse, be sorted out, and again,
not escalate
and not create additional stress, anxiety, potentially depression, potentially lots of worrying times for an individual and an organisation, because you could lose two great members of staff through a conflict that could be resolved. So one of your strands around one of the three mind strands that you mentioned is around promoting wellbeing. EMAS has invested heavily within promoting wellbeing. So one of the things we try and do every year is a wellbeing fortnight. So we promote wellbeing throughout the year anyway, but once a year we do a wellbeing fortnight. And this year in particular we had a spotlight on mental health and staff support, really to raise the profile that anybody can suffer from mental health. It's quite prevalent in the fact that 1 in 4 individuals may experience a mental health issue in a given year, which is the same statistic that you were talking about earlier. But really recognising that actually, as we work for an ambulance service, and the fact that we're more exposed to traumatic incidences, whether we're hearing about it, seeing it, reading about it, we're more exposed, and therefore that potentially results in our exposure being heightened, which could cause more stress, more anxiety, more depression, etc. So we really wanted to focus on mental health, and it also coincided quite nicely with Mental Health Week as well. So that was quite good timing. Through that promotion, we're very much using the slogan around "You are not alone." Again, linking into what Kevin was talking about, and that's really trying to break down those barriers of staff saying, "But this is just part of the job. I'm meant to just deal with these issues. It's a stressful job. This is just to be accepted."
That's what I signed up for.
Yeah, it's what I signed up for. And we're trying to say, actually, no, you don't have to feel like this. And you're not alone when you feel like this, because actually there's other people in the organisation who understand, who maybe have been there, experienced it. So we're really trying to kind of share that message of you're not alone. Kevin mentioned the peer-to-peer. We're strongly advocating that, pushing out the peer-to-peer network. We also have the trauma risk management, as we mentioned earlier, which has been really, really successful. I think we started the trauma risk management in May. We've already done 144 TRIM assessments on our staff. So just in 1 month, being used huge amounts, which is really successful, lots of great feedback.
And it's optional.
And it's optional, absolutely. But again, sharing that message of you're not alone, and trying to reduce stigma of people struggling with some of these traumatic jobs that they go to. So in addition to the support mechanisms that we've put into place, we also recognise it's really important to educate our staff and our managers. So we're trying to make sure that we have a whole wealth of education provided, and road staff in particular go through a whole education programme anyway that talks about mental health, mental issues, mental health issues, mental health patients, how to refer, different pathways, etc., which you'd expect as part of their training. But also we try and promote any new education that comes along. So, for example, most recently there was Dementia Week, and we celebrated that or promoted that by releasing some educational material around what is dementia, and a whole dementia course. So staff didn't have to do it, but it's advertised to staff if they want to learn a bit more about dementia, because it's becoming more prevalent within our community. And so giving staff an opportunity to learn a bit more. In terms of staff support and education, what we're also aiming to do is we're currently working with the university to do some research around staff resilience. So we recognise that staff experience stress, anxiety, depression more regularly if they're feeling depleted, if they're not feeling resilient. So we're trying to understand staff resilience a bit more. So we've currently been doing some research around, well, what is that? What does it mean? And that's going to lead on to some education provision around how can you help yourself about being more resilient, because these things really should come from yourself as well. You've got to take some ownership about your own mental health and making sure that you're okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it is about employer responsibility, but then yes, also individual responsibility about managing your mental health.
So, in a nutshell, there's a whole lot of education, development, movement happening around staff support. In addition, something I did fail to mention was you mentioned around buddying. We actually have a buddy system at EMAS for new individuals who are newly out on the road, because actually it can be really, really scary when you first go out on shift.
That level of responsibility.
Absolutely. So we really recognise that our staff, the staff feedback was, we're struggling with this. It's quite scary. It's quite scary seeing your first dead body. It's quite scary first time you drive on blues with the patient in the back instead of a mannequin.
Yeah.
You know, and so we've actually put in some buddy systems around supporting staff through their first months out there when they're fully fledged individuals. So, and that's been really successful and very welcomed by the staff. So it's really looking really positive. It's feeling really energised.
Yeah.
And I think it's starting to, we've been doing lots of planning in the background, and now it's starting to come to fruition and staff are really feeling it.
And it's influencing the culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I mean, Kevin, when you started talking, you said, I feel like we're doing a lot of the kind of recommendations that Mind makes, and I would absolutely agree with that.
I think for me, Emma, there's one particular incident that's just come to us, Joe's been talking, what I think encapsulates all this. Yeah. It's a crew who went to a job. It was a very traumatic incident, and this individual phoned me before we got this trim. She phoned me 24 hours later on and says, I'm struggling, Kev. I've been to this bad job. I'm a paramedic. I should be able to cope. Just tell me I'm going to be okay. Just tell me I'm going to be okay. And I met with this person. We went through quite a good chat and everything else and supporting. But that just cry out, I think, is, to me, that just captures all what we're trying to do. Just tell me I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, but feeling comfortable to ask for that reassurance and ask for that support. No, absolutely. I think that, you know, what you've put in place is, you know, both proactive but also very responsive to the needs of your staff. And then it's also about, being able to support people no matter where they are on that spectrum, and seeing people as individuals and being quite holistic in your approach to staff wellbeing. I think that sounds really, really encouraging. And I hope people listening can kind of take a lot from what you've kind of put in place. So yeah, thank you for taking the time to share that with us. In terms of, you know, as we're talking about, you know, within East Midlands Ambulance Service, you know, if you want to speak to someone, there's quite clear pathways that people can access support through. But just in general terms, there is a range of support available for anyone wanting to talk to someone about their mental well-being or about any concerns that they may have, whether it's about work, relationships, health, money, or other issues. And obviously speaking to someone in your workplace will be most beneficial if they are aware of mental health and the interaction it can have with work. So a large part of the Blue Light programme is trying to achieve, what we're trying to achieve is really about Blue Light services being more responsive and positive about mental health and promoting a more accepting culture around supporting people, so people get the support they need at the time that they need it. But outside of work, there may be many sources of support available which personnel can find helpful. So going to a GP if you want to seek support that way, or phoning Minds Blue Light info line. Again, we can give you a picture of what's available in your local area, and details of all of this and other sources of support and information will be given at the end of this webinar. So we hope that you found viewing this webinar helpful. We have produced additional webinars in this series, one entitled Looking After Your Mental Health, which talks more at an individual level, as Joe was talking about, how do I manage my mental health, what are the kind of steps I need to take, and then one that talks about mental health awareness in general, so some of the more common conditions that people live with and, you know, what that can look like, as well as the kind of specialist treatment and support available. And please also take a few moments to give us your feedback about this webinar by completing the short survey that immediately follows. It's really important to get your feedback, and it will help us ensure that the Blue Light programme meets your needs. And we've also created some booklets and resources specifically for Blue Light personnel, which cover these topics in greater detail, and they're available to you and your colleagues, so please share these as they may be of help to someone. Again, the information and how to access this will be at the end of the webinar. So we are determined to reach as many Blue Light personnel as possible, so please make your colleagues aware of the Blue Light programme, the support and services that we have available to you, and then also these webinars. So thank you for watching, and thank you, Kev and Joe, for joining me.